Good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Alexandra Vila, co-founder of Brea Communications, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to our second ever State of Safari media preview with Go to Africa. First, we want to extend a special thank you to those that joined us last year and went on to quote and feature insights from our State of Safari report in your coverage. We truly appreciate your interest in the trends that are shaping the safari and conservation space, and we're grateful to have you back with us today. And for those attending for the first time, welcome. We're delighted you could join us for this first look at Go to Africa's latest findings. This year, we're doing things a little differently. Instead of dialing in from different locations, our experts are all together in Cape Town, which should make for an even more dynamic conversation as we unpack the latest data and on-the-ground insights, what they're telling us about the state of safari travel today. After the webinar, you'll receive a follow-up email giving you the first access to the full State of Safari report, so you'll have all the insights and data shared today available. And of course, if you have any questions, we at Brea will be available to help. To guide us through today's conversation, I'm very pleased to introduce Natalia Rosa, CEO of Big Ambitions, who will be leading the discussion and introducing our panel of Go to Africa experts. Natalia, over to you. Please take it away.
Thank you so much, Alexandra, and good afternoon from a very, very toasty Cape Town to the official launch of the Go to Africa State of Safari 2025 report. You that joined us last year will know that it is one of the most closely watched annual benchmarks for the African safari industry. I am Natalia, and I'm going to be the host of today's webinar, and I know that it's going to be very, very useful, giving you great insights into booking behaviors, search patterns, and traveler briefs. What the data tells us, and what our guests today are going to contextualize for us from their experience on the ground, is what makes this conversation worth your time. We're going to be together for a minimum of an hour. The Q&A folder at the bottom of your screen is where you can submit your questions throughout the session, and I will run through those questions during the webinar and pose those to our panelists, as well as some of my own questions that I have put together based on the actual report. So if there's one core narrative that we need to look at that defines this year's data, it is that today's safari traveler is more informed, more premium oriented, and more intentional about timing, sustainability, and conservation than ever before. We are no longer dealing with a client who simply asks, where should I go? We are dealing with a traveler who says, I've narrowed it down, help me decide properly with confidence. So to help me unpack the shift and some of the other insights, I have a great panel of experts with me today. They're going to dig beyond the data. And I'm going to start to my right here. Kate McIntosh is an Africa safari expert at Go to Africa. She has a hospitality background and extensive first-hand travel experience across South Africa, Kruger, Botswana, Victoria Falls, bringing deep product and itinerary design experience. To her right, we have Justin Chapman, who is an Africa safari expert also at Go to Africa, with over 8 years experience crafting bespoke safaris across sub-Saharan Africa and the Indian Ocean Islands. And lastly, we have Adrian Gauhi, who's the head of impact and sustainability at Naweri Group and board chair of the Naweri Foundation Tanzania. For those who don't know, the Naweri Group, which includes B Corp certified Acilia Africa and Go to Africa, channels significant annual funding into nature protection and community-led initiatives across Eastern and Southern Africa. So Adrian, I'm looking forward to a very rigorous perspective on conservation outcomes and the business architecture of responsible tourism from you. No pressure. No pressure. Right, lastly, again, just a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to keep it light. It's going to be a conversation. Please send through your questions on the Q&A folder functionality at the bottom of your screen. Keep them coming through the webinar. And as Alexandra said, the webinar is being recorded, so you will have access to the information afterwards. So are you ready to kick off, panelists?
Yes, go.
Let's go. All right. So remember what I said earlier. If we remember anything from today's webinar, it is that our safari traveler is more informed, more premium oriented, and more intentional about timing, sustainability, and conservation than ever before. And to kick us off and get into the nitty-gritty of that data, I'm going to just pull some of the statistics that we have from our State of the Safari report. And I'm going to pick on you first, Justin. So in the report itself, it says that in 2025, 82% of travelers arrived at a Go to Africa inquiry already having chosen their destination. While this suggests deeper pre-inquiry research, so they have access to a lot more tools to find the information than they're used to, potentially AI or generative AI tools, These itineraries then evolve once you as experts engage with them because of your on-the-ground knowledge. So if I could ask you, Justin, has this been your experience, and what changes when you have the conversation with your clients, having had that knowledge beforehand, a lot more certainty of what it is that they want before they actually get to you than before?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's definitely something that have kind of seen tick up year on year over the last few years, is people coming in a little bit more firm and offering forward a lot more suggestions and specificity within those suggestions. I think it's down to obviously the advent of LLMs and those coming into the fore, and people just having this access to the information. But it definitely, it's led to something which thought of as like algorithmic anchoring, which is that people are getting really stuck to certain ideas that are just sort of, the data is pushing them in a direction. So absolutely, I think our role becomes more critical than ever before in passing that information, because also with this, it's the sort of data driving that stat is at obviously at the inquiry level. So what it looks like once you get to the booking stage and the trips people are actually going on looks a little bit different. So that's really that critical juncture between somebody's dreaming and what it plays out, and us giving them the reality of what it might look like on the ground. So yeah, absolutely, more certainty on it. And obviously there's a fluidity around the conversation. It's actually really nice to have people coming in more informed, because for somebody who does it on a daily basis, it's really nice to go into depth, kind of out the gate. People have a framework to work with. So I've definitely enjoyed that. But yeah, a lot of firmer conversations around boundaries, around, you know, what is and isn't the case, and letting people really lay out what their actual dream is versus, you know, just what they put into an LLM, and then overlaying that onto where they can get that effectively.
A kind of level of trust that gets developed when you're dealing with a human being, and now you're using these LLMs. They're putting out information that the person trusts because they've been using the LLMs, but there are significant gaps on the ground to what the LLMs can actually deliver in terms of the context, what's actually happening at the moment. You know, the LLMs are not going to say, well, you can't fly via the Middle East currently because all, you know, all the aircraft are grounded, etc. So I'll come to you, Kate, and ask you, what are some of the inaccuracies or the gaps that emerge when someone comes to you? They've gone through the discovery phase on their own, they now have some information. With a little bit of information, there's power, but there's also potentially going off track. What are some of those gaps, and how do you then lean in and bridge those gaps?
So I think the important thing to know is that the LLMs are gathering data from various different sources, and people are trusting that, but they also know that you can't trust everything that you find on the internet. So there is that level of them going, okay, well, this is what I'm finding, but is it really accurate? And I think then that's when an expert comes into play, because we absolutely do know if it is correct or not. And I've had people coming in, they're like, I've done this research. What are your thoughts? And then I'll confirm their research, or I'll say, you're 90% there, but you're missing this little chunk of information. And sometimes AI is not pulling up things that we've found out as sort of the first line in the industry, and we're knowing that airlines are starting to launch routes that might not be easily found using these online tools. So that's really when we come into play. And another thing is, you know, you're gathering information, and it's just information. It's not selling the feeling. It's not bringing people to the safari and saying, when you're on that trip, you're going to smell the air, you're going to feel the sun on you, you're going to get that electric prickle in the skin when you start getting close to the wildlife. You can't get that from the LLMs or the AI tools, or, you know, just reading a website. The safari experts are the ones who are going to be telling you this is the right information and this is the right feeling.
And really, when something, or possibly if something were to go awry, just knowing that you have access to somebody who can help you, who knows what's happening on the ground, is essentially an amazing value proposition as a travel advisor or travel expert. How receptive are customers who have gone down this journey with large language models and understood what it is that they want? How receptive are they to you coming in as a curator of experiences or as an editor of the itinerary and saying, well, it's great that you want to drive between Kafue and South Luangwa, but it's going to take you 2 days. How receptive are they to that?
I think they're very receptive. I think that is where that's where the element of trust is missing with AI, and that is where the Safari expert is going to gain the trust, and we can be like, listen, done that drive, never ever recommend it, or we just don't do it whatsoever unless you were willing to spend 3 days camping somewhere, you know. So we've got that expert knowledge, and I think that's the gap is they're not quite trusting what they've read online, and they just want it either confirmed or corrected when they come through to us.
So Justin, would you say your role has somewhat changed from previously based on this emergence of artificial intelligence kind of starting the journey for them, the discovery journey? Would you say that your role has changed?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it goes back to that idea of being able to pass the information that people are getting in an effective way that really like reroutes towards the direction that they're actually headed towards. So I think it was definitely a lot more the case of, you know, coming in with more of a blank slate originally, and you know, the sort of standard requests around Big Five or around, you know, or we just want to go to a beach, or we just want to go. And now you're having to think on your feet, or rather defend what you're putting forward a lot sooner. Because in time gone by, people maybe didn't have access to that information. A lot of people weren't willing to do that deep research on it. Whereas now you have to justify your viewpoint around a given destination and the inclusion or the exclusion of it. So when somebody's coming in talking about, for instance, you know, wanting to travel in peak season to somewhere like the Mara or the Serengeti, which has obviously been in the public eye recently around what that looks like, to be able to sort of really decipher a little bit more closely actually what's underlying that idea. So there's more of almost a psychologist role in the whole thing, as opposed to just a trip planner now, is you're having to really understand people's motivations and their intentions, look at the holistic picture. It's, you know, is this a solo traveler? Is it a repeat traveler to Africa? Is it a big multi-generational family? What is it that they're wanting to achieve from this trip? And you get to that, I think, in a far sooner than historically you might have. And that's great as well, because, you know, you didn't always have the gap or the window in order to get to that stage before you've got 3 other agencies or operators or other people weighing in, and there's kind of the sense of pressure gets created as a result. So with people having that foundational understanding, we're really able to kind of get to the interesting aspects of the journey planning sooner.
Okay, and you mentioned motivations, you mentioned intentions, you mentioned interesting bits. I want to pull in the topic around, and I'm not a lover of the word sustainability, because I think it comes with a lot of complexity. So I'm actually going to say positive impact, and I'll stick with you, Justin. Those intentions, those motivations, are people asking for experiences that bring positive impact to the people, places that they visit? Or are we just telling ourselves a story in the travel industry? Yeah,
I think I mean, this is anecdotal, it is my experience on it, but a little bit of a hard truth for me has been, you know, accepting that people are not going to divert or change their core ideas for what they want. So similar to what the point I was just making, if somebody's coming in and that's a fundamental aspect to the trip for them, then sure, those doors are wide open. But I think more the case these days is that people are expecting almost that the sustainable aspects of the destination or the product, the lodge, the camp that they're using, or the ground handlers, that almost needs to be embedded into it. So it's like the soul of the trip are those core you know, drivers, the engine of it, but it's the body is the trip itself, and that's what is people are interested in ensuring looks a certain way. But underneath it, that's where the infrastructure is important around sustainability. So to the question, it is not my experience that people are coming in and they're willing to look at 2 options and go, you know, I'm going to go for this one solely because it better encompasses sustainable initiatives. land tenure a little bit more clear around who holds ownership around the lodges and who's deriving the benefits from that. However, if they've got options on the table, they want to know that that's sort of a non-negotiable anyways. That's already there, and then choose accordingly. So it's not switching lanes because of that, but it definitely is almost a de facto part of the story now, and
so it's foundational, essentially.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Would you like to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just confirms something that we've seen. So MIT did some really good research on this. It's basically the question is, how do you bridge the gap between measuring sustainability and getting people's willingness to pay for it, right? And so what the research showed was that people don't generally pay a premium for sustainability. However, lots of people care about it. And so that means, I think, to kind of extend the question, it's not good enough to just say this is a mediocre product, but it's more sustainable. Like, people probably aren't going to bite on that. Mm-hmm. If two products are of the same caliber and one is more sustainable, has a better story, is better able to tell that, then that can be a reason to get over there. But the number of people who are committed enough to pay a premium for that is a very small percentage. And I think what that means for us is also, it's not about trying to sell on sustainability. It's kind of, you have to be able to have a world-class product that people want, and then build the foundation around that, or build the story into it. And I think people are sophisticated enough to unpack that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, we're going to hop into one of the other themes that really super interesting around shoulder season months having overtaken high season and inquiry share. So the report suggests that travelers are prioritizing wildlife conditions, value alignment, and crowd avoidance over traditional holiday timing. I myself don't like to travel when lots of people are traveling, so this is music to my ears, and demand is spreading more evenly across the year, reshaping those availability dynamics. Kate, we were having a chat outside a little bit earlier about availability and booking early and how difficult it is to get availability. So I'm interested in your perspective on this shoulder season becoming the new peak, and what potentially could that mean for someone like me who likes to travel in the shoulder season in terms of availability, pricing pressure, and then capacity within parks.
I'm a huge fan of traveling out of season. I love a shoulder season. I love a low season because, like you said, fewer people, fewer crowds. You do kind of feel that just by traveling at that time of year, you're getting a more exclusive safari experience. And as one person told me many years ago, and it sticks in my brain to this day, the animals don't go on vacation. So they're there. It just, maybe the rains and move them off a little. Maybe it's a little bit harder to spot them in the bushes, but they're still there. Most animals, especially predators, are territorial. So I do think traveling in shoulder season is really lovely, and it does take that massive pressure off the peak season. But I do feel like the peak season might still remain that way because it's very much tied into the UK, US, and European school holidays. Families coming out, we're seeing a lot more families, a lot more multi-generational. We were talking about that earlier. We're seeing a lot more of that coming through Africa. So I think we're still going to retain that peak season, but it is nice to see that those who can will travel outside of the season. It's be retirees or people with a little bit more time, a little more flexibility from work, digital nomads, that sort of thing, that they can do that. It would be nicer to spread out in terms of funding and that sort of thing, spread it out more over the year rather than just dump it all on sort of 3 months in the middle of the year. Again, for the safari industry, at the end of those 3 peak season months, they're tired. Sense of humor is starting to fade away. And I think if you spreading it out more evenly through the year, you're going to not have so many peaks and troughs, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit about the different market segmentation and source markets that have come to the fore that potentially are those that would travel more in the shoulder season because it suits them, pricing pressures, etc. Adrian, I'll come to you and ask you a similar question around the shoulder season. If shoulder season were to become something incredibly popular and more, whether it's a couple because they can travel outside of the holiday, or perhaps a new source market that hasn't discovered the safari experience as much as one of the existing source markets, if shoulder season became a new peak, if you will, what would that mean for the ecosystem and conservation management in those destinations, given that we've had this safari recipe for such a long time? What would the impact be?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a really happy middle ground where pushing some of the demand for safari into the shoulder season would be hugely beneficial. So I think everyone's seen what came out in Serengeti this year and the Mara. We've seen what it's like when you can't have too much of a good thing. Basically, we all want tourism and we all want it, and we know it plays a hugely important role. But spreading that load will be incredibly beneficial to all the ecosystems, I think. And so if you think about, I mean, I tend to think about them as sort of as natural assets, and you want to get a good return on that asset, and you want to spread that over the whole year rather than constraining it at the peak season in there. And so from a conservation management perspective, for the countries that are running national parks, for the entities that are managing conservation areas, being able to draw that period out and just get a longer, less intensive period to get all your guests through, I think is hugely beneficial for those areas. And there's a great place. It's not like if you start sending people in shoulder season, you're going to have overcrowding next year. There's a lot of room to grow those seasons before it's problematic.
Yeah.
So lots of room for good before it gets problematic.
And experiences that you would not ordinarily have during the peak season.
I mean, I think everyone around this table loves traveling in region. One of the best times. Yeah. Fat, happy animals, clean rivers, birds off the charts, flowers. Like it's just
off the charts. Absolutely. All right. So the next theme in the mix is around what the destination chips really tell us. And I've just come back from ITV Berlin. Africa stands were pumping, and we know that there are the usual suspects, the big three that always attract all the attention. What I'm interested in from this report is how that's actually changed. So Madagascar, Malawi doubling, okay, albeit from a low base, but that's incredibly encouraging. South Africa, Kenya, and Tanzania still 64% of the total inquiries, but there is a bit of a shift around and things are looking a little bit interesting. So I'll come to you, Justin. Botswana was a big hitter over the last year, according to the State of Safari report. What's driving that? Is that huge media that's happened and people are now super interested in Botswana? Is it that Botswana is marketing itself differently? What would you say is driving that demand?
Yeah, I think that Botswana, I mean, it's always, has had the reputation of this kind of area where you've got low volume of travelers and really high impact in terms of what those travelers do on the ground with regards to conservation and sustainability. But it's also, as a result, a bit of a blue chip destination. And I think what's happening is people are seeing, as you just referenced now, what's happened in the Serengeti and the Mara, and are willing to accept the kind of premium that comes with going to a blue chip destination in order to get what they really want. So Botswana before, the conversation may have been, all things else equal, you're a first-time safari goer, you just want to see maybe some elephants and see some lions and so forth. There are a lot of places that we can achieve that. Another thing that enters the conversation now is that sense of exclusivity when you're having that experience. And so that paying for almost a sense of the horizon untarnished by hundreds of vehicles all around you is something that people are more willing to do now. And I think there's also sort of coming into the collective consciousness is this understanding around what a safari actually is and how it differentiates to another kind of trip that you may take, and the importance of the planning process around that, and why it is something that you can look at well in advance. And because you're looking at well in advance, both in order to secure the trip that you're wanting, you also can kind of budget accordingly. So people who otherwise might have been pushed out because they were only looking a year out and funds didn't allow for it in such a short amount of time, are willing to really invest in the destination to get what they want. So I think it's marketing in the sense that Botswana has had that reputation, and it's kind of now really that idea has spread and people are willing to pay out a little bit more in order to get that feel. And also a proliferation of product. I mean, I think there's a lot more product in Botswana now across the spectrum. Obviously still primarily on the very top end of that spectrum, but there's more range for people to plug into. So a little bit more accessibility for people who perhaps before just weren't able to go.
And then there's the shoulder season.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
Kate, Kenya overtaking Tanzania, that's pretty notable. From your experience, is that also a reflection of Kenya marketing itself just differently? Do you think that the product has changed? Is it a similar experience that Justin has had from a Botswana perspective?
I think there is a bit of similarity in that one of the things that I like about Kenya and encourage my travelers to look at is the private conservancies. And that for me is really changing the landscape of Kenya, because the national parks are fantastic, but as we saw this last year, the number of vehicles, people getting in the way of migration and that kind of thing, a lot of people look to them like, we don't want that. And the private conservancies, if you need to see the migration and that's on your list of things to do, then you've got to go into the national parks. So you've got to go into the Serengeti, you've got to go into the Masai Mara National Reserve. Go and see the migration, but then take yourself out. Go and visit the private conservancies, experience different activities that lend itself to just enhancing the whole safari. So being able to do night drives, going off-road. So I think that that's possibly why Kenya is maybe just tipping Tanzania. Tanzania's really only got 2 private reserves. And as Justin used a good phrase, they're blue chip. So they charge a premium, but they're charging a premium for a reason. They're keeping the masses at bay, whereas it's a little bit more accessible in Kenya. So yeah, I think that's a potential factor.
And Malawi and Madagascar, Justin, what happened there?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So I think again, just to sign back to the fact that this is on the inquiry stage, and it kind of clicks back into what I was saying earlier, is that people, I think now, because of the access that they have to information, it's also kind of flattened the geography of Africa a little bit, in the sense that all destinations are equal in terms of their accessibility because you have the information coming at you. But the reality is that the logistics, there's sort of an analog friction to moving from that digital space into actually realizing those ideas and those dreams. And Malawi and Madagascar definitely on the rise, but as far as inquiries goes, there's more intent. But I suspect that for the destination, there's a little bit more of it, or there will be a little bit more of a lag time between being able to service it in such a way that somebody coming in and going, you know, I want to go to Botswana, easy peasy, or Kenya, or do a South Africa circuit, or these things are easy to do very readily and very quickly. The reality is still, I would say, from my experience, Malawi a little bit less so, but with Madagascar, there's a real friction to moving about there unless you're going to some very niche destinations that requires a little bit more planning, more back and forth, and more of an understanding of what you're getting involved in. Because I think people maybe have oftentimes at those destinations, it might be repeat travelers who are thinking about spreading out, and they want something that is similar to what they've had previously, and it's not going to look exactly that way when you go to those sort of more far-flung hidden gem destinations. There will be longer periods where you're waiting at an airstrip in the dust. It's not going to be seamless. And so I think, again, sort of when you get to the stage of chatting through that, it's not to dissuade people, it's just absolutely to give them a clear sense of what that entails. But definitely more interest, and I really do hope, as somebody who loves selling those kinds of destinations, that we'll see the infrastructure develop accordingly. I mean, that's where it all starts, is that more people speaking about it, more of an interest, and then the rest will follow. More of a commercial interest, which hopefully we'll see those flourish even more.
And hopefully positive impact to those destinations that are not getting the lion's share of interest. We talk a lot about geographic spread in Southern Africa and East Africa, trying to get people to destinations that are amazing, the gems, as you said, that accessibility is an issue. So how do we get them there? And just talking about that from a conservation perspective, Adrian, for those destinations like Madagascar and Malawi that weren't getting the interest that the Botswanas of the world are getting, the positive impact that brings to communities and conservation as a result of that inquiry shift. But tell me a little bit about what impact you would see on the ground in destinations like that.
I think it's an interesting one. Because there are two sides to this. The one is that going from zero tourism to some tourism is hugely beneficial, right? And you can do that just from a landscape management thing. You know, one of the things that massively underestimated is just having game drives going out, how much of a deterrent that is for activities. And we saw this even in the Serengeti. There are bits of the Serengeti where Asalia has put up camps where nobody else was before, and there's just that presence can be hugely beneficial from a sort of conservation perspective. it's not automatic that it's going to be better for people. It matters a lot about who the operators are and how they operate. And so there's lots of scope for that to be a big positive impact, but it's not automatically saying that more tourism will necessarily have a huge impact on the people there, because you can have operators who are less interested in creating jobs locally and sourcing locally and doing all of making all the decisions that will amplify the impact of their presence there. And so I think in general, it's hugely beneficial. I think there's a lot to be gained for all of these small destinations, because going from very little tourism to a little bit more has disproportionate benefit. And then as that picks up, you get sort of diminishing returns in a sense, to the point where it can be overcrowded and everything else. But I think them being on the right side of that curve is hugely beneficial.
If you have just joined us, we are talking all things State of Safari on behalf of Go to Africa with my panelists, Kate, Justin, and Adrian. And if you do have a question for us, please do feel free to put that in the Q&A folder at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to those questions towards the end of our conversation. We're going to flick over to another theme, and that is the premium shift. We were talking about blue chip destinations earlier, Justin. So if there's one theme that we're seeing in the 2025 report on how safari industry thinks about its market positioning, it's this premium shift. And very interestingly, in the report, medium-high budgets have grown from 36% to 59% of inquiries in a single year, while medium budgets have contracted sharply from 53% to 39%. Also, very interestingly, 1 week safari is declining and being replaced by polarization between very short, intensive trips and extended 2 week plus experiences. So you've got kind of opposite ends of the pole here. And travelers also booking in advance. So that booking window post-COVID is now finally increased. I know we were in a bit of a world of pain just after COVID with these tiny booking windows. So Kate, this jump from 36% to 59% for medium-high budgets is remarkable. It's quite extraordinary. How much of that is genuine upward aspiration among travelers, and how much simply just the rising cost of a safari?
Probably 50-50 if I had to think about it, because safari costs are going up. And I think after COVID, there was a bit of a holding pattern in terms of lodges putting up their pricing. And now that we're seeing the natural flow come back, you referenced it there as well, the lead time to booking is 12 to 18 months was what we were used to seeing pre-COVID. After COVID, it was like a couple of months. It's now settling back into a familiar rhythm. And I think lodges are more confident that they can maintain the standard and service that they want to, as well as sustainability projects, positive impact, because travel is, it's not so disjointed anymore, it's flowing. So I think it's 50-50 in that direction, and then another 50-50 in that we're seeing a lot more people who are going, we want to make this trip utterly amazing. This has got to be everything, and we're willing to pay more to get the experiences that we want. And not all lodges are going to offer those kinds of experience. Your more entry-level budget lodges, they're just kind of going with the standard game drives, bushwalks. When you want to start adding in community projects, perhaps wildlife experiences that are not on the beaten path, you're going to have to stay at a more premium lodge, and you're going to have to pay more for that experience. And I think people are realizing that, and they'd rather save more and really go on that big blowout trip that includes absolutely everything they've ever read or dreamed about. And yeah, like I said, willing to wait and save for it.
So those are those 2 week plus trips.
Yeah.
With the whole family.
The whole family, or you want the most incredible, we're going on our honeymoon. We'll probably never get back to Africa, which is half true, because they'll probably bring the family back at some point.
Yeah.
I've had honeymooners, they're like, remember us, we've got kids now and we're coming back on safari. And you're like, yes, bring the next generation through, please. But yeah, they think that it's going to be their one big trip. Maybe they're a retired couple, it's their one big trip, and they want to go all out, and they do. And then a couple of years later, I don't know about you, but you get this clear, remember us. Actually, we fell so far in love with Africa that we have to come back.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Justin, Kate was talking about the booking windows. What is your experience seen? Are you seeing these clients looking for that experience, that bucket list, I'm not going back to Africa, planning really, really far in advance? Is that so what you're seeing on the ground?
Yeah, definitely planning far in advance. So as touched on earlier, is just a recognition of the environment we operate in with the limited inventories of at these lodges, particularly if you're looking at the peak season periods. But I think also maybe a shift of people thinking about Africa as a destination, again, just because of this flood of information that people have accessibility to, as being a one and done sort of destination and a bucket list, like a true bucket list, one time to the continent. And Africa is a continent idea. It's just, doesn't matter where we go, as long as we go to Africa, that's enough. To this more nuanced view of what it means to travel to Africa and the different places that you can go within it, and a movement from that bucket list idea to more of a life list, where it's like, and I have this conversation often now with people, which, 5 years ago, pre-COVID, was not really happening as often, is at the outset going, based on how you've spoken to me, I really think that you are potentially going to be coming back here. So that's going to influence how we approach this, as opposed to just, we want to see everything. We've got this one time to do it in, and people totally being open to that idea, because I think people are thinking longer term now with regards to travel to Africa, especially because they're having to speak, that far out in advance to us in the first place. So thinking about, 2 years on or 3 years on or 4 years on for a potential next trip is not out of the realm of possibility in the way that it once was. And I do also think maybe a little bit of that is driven by that premium aspect to the pricing. And when you're putting so much money towards a trip, it almost takes on, this sort of status and value of its own, and you're willing to accord it a respect as being an asset in a way that you wouldn't otherwise. And so more willingness to think about things in those terms, because it's a real investment. And another aspect to that is absolutely an investment of your time, which I think is the most, that is like the luxury item these days, is people being willing to part with those 10 days that they've got in order to go on a trip, or 2 weeks, or as we see, people are drifting into longer trips. But because that is so important to them, and there's the financial aspect to it, we want to do this right, whether it's just on this upcoming trip or on subsequent ones. Like, you tell us, how do we structure this whole thing?
So thank you, Justin, for teeing that up for me, because I was going to ask Kate about what premium means, because I hear, again, like the S word, sustainability. What does that actually mean? We hear premium, luxury travel all the time. What is that? And in my view, it's time. It's time. So you said, the lodge experience. What does premium mean in that environment?
So I just want to go back to time quickly, because one of the things that we're also seeing now is that, because, as you just said, Africa's a continent. So people are like, I want to go to this country and this country and this country. And it's like, whoa. 10 days, we can't do it all, because flights don't work that way. We've got one airline that accesses that place, and it doesn't fly every day. And sometimes there's an overnight stay. And suddenly your 10 days to travel becomes less, because you're having to have transits. So we try and discourage people from doing too much in a short time frame, and rather increase the time that they have in the destination to fully absorb and immerse themselves in where they are. And that is a bit of a premium, because you're spending all this money to come to Africa, and now you're literally just going from place to place to place. You're traveling more than you're actually enjoying the lodges, enjoying the location, enjoying the activities. Rather slow it down, condense it more, and really enjoy where you're going to be, and really soak up that whole experience in 1, 2, 3 locations, depending on your time frame. So that's a premium. And people are happier to spend a bit more at a lodge that's got more to offer, so that if they're spending 3 to 4 nights there, they're not doing the same things on repeat. They're actually getting to try a whole different variety of activities, which only set to enhance the whole safari experience. Some people want your standard premium experience, which is sort of fine dining. They want to have the best wines. They want to have the luxuries. So places like Botswana or East Africa don't really have air conditioning, but some lodges are starting to come up with this cool breeze evening system. And for some people, that's essential. and they want that, and they're willing to pay more for it. For other people, it, like I said, goes back to activities. They want more from the safari. They don't want your stock standard game drives. They want the off-roading, the night drive, the ability to visit communities, or if there's local attractions in the area, like a forest or a hike, they want to be able to go and do that. Premium things that other people might not get to experience. So it might be a lodge that costs a little bit more because it is so far flung and out there, and they're the only ones in that area that are really going to give you access to this unique experience that nobody else in the world is really getting to. They're going to pay for that. I don't want to say like bragging rights that they've been there and you haven't, but to go and see something and do something that nobody else has, and be an adventurer and an explorer.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll connect that to the theme that is in the report around that layered safari experience, that it's been marketed, particularly in source markets like the US, where it's been marketed a very, very specific way. And I'll come to you, Justin, just ask you that big 5 way of marketing safari experience. Kate was talking about community. I know that's close to your heart. The cultural aspects, all the little touches. It's not just about the big 5. It's it's about the little 5 and the birds during the green season, etc., etc. This report suggests that kind of way of marketing or demand for big 5 is softening a little bit. Is that a genuine shift in what travelers want, or is it just that we're now starting to explore other aspects of the safari because there's the demand for something a little different?
Yeah, so I mean, the term itself, is probably everybody at this table is well aware, is a bit of an anachronism. It goes back to colonial period and for hunting, and so it doesn't actually have good connotations. So it's really interesting that it's come into sort of usage in the way that it has for something that's quite opposite as far as ecotourism goes. And so it is a label that we could maybe start shifting away from. But I think it filled a space for people for decades where it was just this idea of Africa. It's like you needed almost something to anchor that to. And so the idea of the big 5 that was it. But in my experience chatting to clients, and this is usually where I start when somebody's come in with an inquiry talking about the big 5, is to go, let's break that down. Like, what is the big 5? Like, which members of the big 5 are you really interested in? Because there are relatively few places that offer all of them in one spot. And it might mean that we then need to look at combining multiple areas in order for you to get to see all of them. Is that what you had in mind when you said just the big 5? And more often than not, people just, they just want to see the big mammal. And I think that part of it remains core. I think that the other elements to a trip, particularly for first timers, they need to have that sense of connecting with larger wildlife, because that's what their idea is of Africa out the gate. But all of these, the kind of additional activities that Kate was talking to. So that if that's your core, that's your basic. You kind of need the standard menu, if you will. You need like a chef's plate with the other little activities that you can lean into. Tapas, exactly. So people are definitely expecting that more and more, as opposed to just being content to go, I've seen the elephant and seen the lion, and more amenable to visiting places that aren't necessarily big 5 as such. But it's still, it's still the bedrock, it's still the foundational term, so it's still used. But I suspect, again, with more information and people accessing, having more access to understanding what that is, and also having a more nuanced idea of what they want to see coming in. So you'll have more people going, we're really interested in wild dog. And so what would be the best place to maybe get to see that at this time? And that's a great example, because that is something that varies year on year, which is where LLMs are not going to be able to spit out an easy answer for you. So that conversation becomes really important at that point.
We often hear people say that they come to Africa for the wildlife, and they come back because of the people, and they come back because of the understanding the impact that tourism has on conservation and community. And Adrian, I'll pull you in here. We talk about conservation, we talk about impact. What does Nweri do differently to ensure that the model delivers that genuine long-term benefit to the landscapes and the communities that are touched by the tourists that the Go to Africa team are bringing into the region?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. And I think also just good to preface it that we are not doing this from a grandstanding point of view. It's how that we figured this all out. We don't have all the answers. We can tell you how we do it and how that's a bit different. And also just to say that, you know, other players who aren't necessarily doing as much by number or volume, you know, every little bit helps. We're not coming at this saying, unless you can shoot the lights out, don't bother. You know, everyone can chip in and do their bit. So with those sort of caveats aside, I think there are two bits to this. So one is just how it's baked into the group and the DNA originally. So if you look at the organizations, the people who've been, you know, the organizations that came to form it. So some of the initial camps like Recaro, the guys, the family who started that, instrumental in getting the Conservancies and the Mara going and all of that. So the first bit is this long thread of history of the people who are in the group have thought long and hard about this and have a long track record of being involved in trying to figure out how you make conservation work for people and wildlife and not pitting them as kind of two opposing forces where you have to solve for one or the other. The second bit then is a bit more of the mechanics of how that happens. And the way I think about it is, I think of the funding model that we use for this is is based in fairness. And what that means is it's a big thing that we're trying to do, that everyone's trying to do. You're trying to conserve enormous areas while having an impact on large numbers of people. And that's a big problem to solve. And you can't pin it all on the traveler because they're already doing so much, right? They're coming out here and they you know, and it's their holiday, right? You can't solve the world's problems by going on holiday necessarily.
I'd like to.
Yeah. Maybe pop into Tehran. And so the first bit is you can't pin it all on the travelers. You can't pin it all on the organizations either, because they're commercial businesses that need to make money, right? And there's, you know, there's almost an infinite need of this. You would bankrupt every business in the industry if it was exclusively on them to fix all of this. And also you can't pin it all on the governments. You know, the governments do a huge amount. They spend a lot of resources on these areas and all of that. And so what we have is a funding model that blends all of those. For a lot of the travelers, we have an optional fee that's tagged on. That is a conservation fee. It usually comes out to less than 1% of an invoice. Most people are quite happy with it. And then that's matched by the group, and that's from revenues, not from profits. So even if the group doesn't make any money, you still have to match all the travelers' amounts raised. And then the third bit in that are the people who are invested in the group and who created it are also have a long-term ambition and vision for this, and they then committed their own philanthropic funding into it. And so what that means is you get these three resources pooled together where you're not overly, you know, you're not asking the philanthropist to do everything, you're not asking the traveler to do everything, you're not asking the business to do everything. But combined, you actually have a huge amount of leverage and ability to then really use the long experience that we have in these areas and the depth of experience of people on our team, matching that with substantial resources to really start driving systemic change in there. And I think that's maybe one way that we're a bit different.
Thank you for that. And yes, I would like to go on holiday, so we'll keep it at that. Right, so this section of the report I found incredibly fascinating because we talk about our source markets and our market segments, and it's been rinse, repeat, same source markets, same market segments, year in, year out, we know the story. And I saw some very interesting countries pop up on our source market, the status of, I was actually quite flabbergasted. I'm going to first go into the market segments because this is a market segment we've been talking about for a while, and that's multi-generational trips. Now, I can only imagine how much fun, but also how complicated it must be to put a trip together for multiple generations with multiple requirements and demands and desires and insights and what it is that they're wanting to get out of the trip. Kate, does that complexity, or rather, what does that complexity actually demand of a specialist when you're putting together something like that? Or do you think that the AI, generative AI aspect that we were talking about a little bit earlier will give them a little bit of a leg up on the ladder to get them to the point where they come to you and you are then able to craft something that meets everybody's needs a bit better than perhaps you would have in the past?
I think that as an expert, we actually have the upper hand. We have the experience of travel, so we know what it's going to be like on a 70 to 80-year-old. We know what it's going to be like and how it affects a young child or teenager. I've recently had an inquiry from a multi-generational family where it's not granny and grandpa who are paying for the whole trip, that all the families are paying. So it's been very, very collaborative, and there's been a lot of decision making, and there's a lot of them having to trust me And a lot of me having to apply a bit of psychology to really understand, because one has got these expectations, the others have got different expectations. And it's like, how do we marry everybody's expectations into one happy trip where everybody's going to have a great time? The wives want to feel relaxed. They don't want to feel like they're running after the children. The dads don't want to feel stressed that they're just shelling out high numbers to pay for everything. And the grandparents need to be comfortable. So I think that there is a high level of EQ that we have to apply as experts in the field, and our knowledge of travel, and actually having gone through the airports, having sat on the planes, how is that going to affect every age group in that multi-gen family? So I think we are definitely the stronger option in an AI.
Of the expert.
Definitely. Definitely. And I mean, I am part of a very large family. There's 19 of us all together. We've got the granny and grandpa in their 80s. And at the time we traveled as a huge, big family. The youngest was 6. And there were a lot of expectations. There was a lot of moving parts, because now you've got to move 19 people through an airport, 19 people onto a transfer. You've got to find a lodge that comfortably is going to take the families, because it's not a cookie cutter situation. You've got 5 in that family, 4 in that family. You really have to be able to know your properties, know your destinations, and feel 100% in control of looking after that family. And that's what they need from you.
And hopefully they don't call you when the dodgy uncle does something to embarrass everybody and you have to rescue the situation.
Exactly.
Dustin, on the counter to that, the solo traveler. So I love to travel on my own. What are you seeing from a solo traveler perspective?
So solo travelers sit very close to my heart. I had to get a testimonial for something, and I've got a long time repeat traveler. She's now knocking on close to 90s, but she's one of my most avid travelers and has gone all over. Solo travelers definitely. I think there's also been a little bit of leeway given for solo travelers as far as costings go. Definitely something I've noticed in the last few years, kind of coming out of COVID. There was a point that was raised earlier that made me think about the pricing when we were talking about premium. It's so crazy to see how that skyrocketed now. But in COVID, when we were sitting in it and everybody was just scrambling to try and get somebody through the door, I feel like there has been a little bit of a hangover effect, but there's been a residual effect of many lodges and portfolios still continuing to offer no single supplements, for instance, over certain periods. And that was a big deterrent for a lot of people previously. Even now, solo traveler inquiry, that their budget is going to need to be a good 20-30% higher than anybody else to sort of really be able to give them what they're likely looking for. Also find that solo travelers do go deeper into the detail and are looking for quite specific things in what they're wanting. I think because they're not having to balance up, contrasting to multi-generational families where you need, in constructing those sort of trips, you need something for everyone at multiple levels. So there's kind of a little bit of a lowest common denominator effect that has to come into play. But for a solo traveler, it's wide open. So you get to do what you want to do in the way that you want to do it. So definitely, I think there's been more space created for people. Also, again, back to these themes kind of weave in and out of one another, but that idea of access to information, people feeling more secure in pursuing going to do that trip that they never would have thought of. But now there's a blog that's showing you exactly what that person's experience was like. You've got fact sheets on all the websites for all the different camps and lodges. You know exactly what it's going to look like, but you want the experience of it. And that's way more accessible now than I think it's ever been before because of those factors. Yeah.
You mentioned kind of traveling on your terms or traveling the way you want to travel. I think that was your wording. And part of the State of Safari report, there are a number of trends that have been pulled out from the data. And one of them is this wellness in the wild, and not wellness in terms of I'm going to go live my best life and have massages every day, but in terms of being able to pace my travel, to pace my safari, not to be in a rush, this kind of aspect of time being a luxury. And so, Kate, I guess the question to you, and it might be a solo traveler, not families that are on deadline pressure because they've got to get back to school, etc. are you finding that travelers are specifically asking for the slower journey, or is it just we see in the data that they're spending more time in one place? What conversations are you having with your customers around that?
So it's interesting that I would say probably 100% of my solo travelers have all been women. They might be retired, or they just might have access to funds. And as Justin was saying, this reduction of the single supplements and encouraging the solo travel. A trip that maybe didn't seem accessible before is now accessible. And a lot of these women that I'm dealing with are like, you know what, I'm not sitting around waiting for somebody, I can look for a friend, or my partner doesn't come. My most favorite solo traveler is married, but her husband won't get on a plane for more than 6 hours. So she's like, I'm not going to stop my life. I'm going to go and I'm going to enjoy this trip, and I'm going to do it, as Justin said, on my terms. And if that is, I want to spend 5 nights sitting at the Ngorongoro crater, listening to the birds in the garden, and going on a coffee tour, and learning how to make sourdough bread. That's what I want to do with my time. And I'm going to. And it's going to be in a beautiful country where I'm a guest, I'm a visitor, I'm learning something new. And so, yeah, a lot of these solo travelers are crafting their dream trips, and they're spending the time that they want to spend in the different destinations. And I think that there is a leaning towards spending more time, if it's available to you, to really switch off and have a holiday. And I've just done a trip now, which was to Europe, and I was like, this is hard. Buses, trains, planes, airports. It was also cold, which wasn't great for me. And I realized just how relaxing a safari is. Sure, you're waking up early for game drives, and you're going on guided walks, and there is the thrill of the chase when you're maybe following a hunt. But there is a rhythm to every day. And the fact that when you're staying at the lodges, everything is being done for you. You're not having to worry about going to a shop or finding a restaurant or having pre-booked to make sure that you could get into that restaurant. Everything's just happening for you right then and there. And I think as a solo traveler as well, it takes the anxiety out of travel in Africa, because the way we structure our trips, there's somebody to meet you at every point of the way. And so when you're traveling perhaps in Asia or Europe, and you're doing it more on your own independent means, and you kind of think, well, what happens if my plane is delayed? Or who am I going to phone? Or there's a whole team that we've got that is looking after you. And there's always somebody meeting at the airports. It's as simple as my travelers saying to me, always wanted to be met at the airport with a sign. And I was like, well, tick that box. I can do it for you. So I think travel in Africa is safe for solo travelers because of this support that you get. Yeah, and then they can structure their days and their trips exactly to their terms.
Okay, well, we said solo traveler, we said safaris, lots of S's, and I'm going to go back to the S word that I don't like, Adrian. Actually, I'm not going to go back to that. Let's rather talk about it as regenerative travel, shall we say? So leaving a place better than we found it. Do you believe that it has become a genuine booking driver, or it's secondary to location and comfort? And we've had this question coming into the Q&A, where someone has said, at what stage of the selling pipeline, if at all, are we able to tell this positive impact story to customers without being afraid of greenwashing, for example? I mean, the antithesis to that is green hashing. So how do you tell that story?
It's an interesting one. I think a lot of it is about framing it for broad-based appeal, right? And so, and it has to come back to the product. I think that the sustainability, the regenerative, and all of that, your question to what extent is it a driver of bookings? I think, again, if you've two similar properties and one has got a much stronger case for it, you can see it happening in that case. But people aren't going to go out of their way, I don't think necessarily. You guys can speak into this a bit more, but I don't see people going, certainly not for other sustainability features, you don't see people, except for a really hardcore few, going out and expressly choosing something based on its sustainability credentials first, and then the quality and location second, right? I feel like it's still, there's much more awareness about it. People are building much more sophisticated vocabulary and mechanisms for assessing it. There are a lot more regulations coming in place. You'll see that EU one coming in this year, controlling how you can market sustainability to European consumers, which is great as well, because it gives people a bit more confidence in it, and it stops that race to the bottom, which is just to have some credential or some token thing so that you can just say that you are sustainable. Do I need to?
No, that makes
Yeah,
sense. I
that-
guess,
yeah.
so, to tease that out a little bit.
Yeah.
Now, I'm coming to Kate and Justin. I care, but not deeply enough for it to be the deciding factor in terms of when I'm going through that customer booking journey. At what point is that conversation had? Because I'm not going to raise it. So are you two going to raise it? Are you going to say, oh, incidentally, here are your 4 options, and option B and option D deliver X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think and people might even just have some of the vocabulary around it, but like fleshing out exactly. But fleshing out almost the grammar of it and getting them to understand how it all fits together. That is really our job. And I do think that there's almost a natural cadence to a consultation with somebody where that they're open to it or it's not, because it's going to land like a bag of rocks if you try and throw it in at a time where it's just the person feels uncomfortable discussing it or feels like you're trying to take a line with them. But I do think there are a lot of opportunity points through the building out of a trip where it comes into the picture right from the outset. So as I was saying earlier, somebody comes in with the idea of, okay, I know that July in the Mara is the time that you're supposed to be there, and at that juncture that offers you an opportunity to go, okay, we can definitely do this, and that's what that would look like, but you need to be aware of everything. But these are some of the alternatives we might look at. And something you said earlier, Adrian, which is I haven't thought about it for a while, but I love that idea, is that every dollar spent in those destinations that are not over commercialized is going to go a lot further than the ones that are just funneled into over resourced, over supplied area. And so, what the meaning or the meaningfulness of your dollar spend, and to start getting people to think about it in those terms. So not simply but not done in a kind of a hand wavy chastising way, but done in a way of, this is another aspect to the planning of your trip that's really exciting. And these are the things that you can do. These are all the options that we have to make an impact in different areas. You get to choose how you do it. Even if you want to go to the tried and trusted route, that's fine. This is how you're contributing in that area through, I mean, we can only speak to what we do, but as Adrian laid out there, this is how you're contributing already. So, and I think you don't even need to be, you can be a micro agency operating solo, and it's in the partners that you're choosing, and you can flesh out what that looks like. So for me, there's like some lodges where I've gone there and it's just had such an impact on me personally. The fact that most of the staff comes from that community that's 10 kilometers away, and what that's actually meant for that community. And so to be able to get people kind of thinking a little bit along those terms is definitely something that I think can come into the conversation whenever, and it doesn't have to be from a moral high ground at all.
Yeah. Well, one of the questions we had coming in, and if you do have a question, please feel free to add it to the Q&A, was around how we as experts can help bridge the gap and steer clients towards those lodges that are making the bigger impact. So actually knowing what that positive impact is, really what that positive impact is, and then when and where to put it into the conversation so it doesn't come across as a bragging rights, essentially.
Exactly.
I think
for
us is that for the almost 20 years that I've been doing this, I wouldn't say that I was focused on that. You start off in the industry and you go, it's got all about the animals, it's all about the safari, and it's only as you travel further and further into the journey that you realize just how much effect we have as safari experts, but also our travelers have. And it's just creating awareness. It might not be something that they've even given thought to. They're like Africa, native tribes, animals. They haven't even thought like how far the reaches can actually go. So for us, it's about creating awareness, as you say, in a very gentle and non-patronizing way. And one of my best examples was telling people about a village visit that I did. And I bought a necklace from the little curio shop, not even giving it a moment's thought that the village I was about to go and visit had one of the women who'd done the beadwork. And during the visit, she came up to me and she patted my chest. I only spoke English and she's only spoke Ma, and she patted my chest, she pointed at herself, and tears came after that. And I realized, wow, I've just changed this lady's life. So for me, it's been a journey of learning. And I think for a lot of our travelers, it's still a journey of learning. And maybe a more savvy traveler would be thinking about regenerative travel. But maybe sort of your less travel people, it's not quite on their radar yet, and it's up to us to put it there in the nicest way.
Just to add to that, maybe to the question that was asked there, is first and foremost, you need to inform yourself in such a way that it can naturally enter the conversation. So if it's just a talking point that you're reaching for, then it's very obvious what you're doing, and again, it makes it uncomfortable. But if it's something that you burst in, that you're able to kind of organically just chat through when the moment arises, the first and foremost to look into who you're using. Are you regularly using specific lodges? Are you asking questions around, what are they doing? Not in an attacking way, but
you're not selling it.
You're informing.
It's a story.
Yeah.
You're telling a story.
Yeah.
There's one other point on that, though, which I think is quite interesting. What we find is that in an increasingly polarized world as well, you have to think about how you position things.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what's ironic is that both ends of the spectrum converge quite closely on nature protection. Both, like, if you're extremely left or right leaning, you're probably still both quite pro nature conservation. However, how you frame that for different audiences matters. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about how sustainability and impact influences the product. And so when we're talking about pioneering electric cars, we don't sell it from an emissions reductions point of view. You sell it from a quality of game drive, right?
Sure.
Because that's got a much broader appeal.
Yeah.
You're not going to then tickle somebody's sentiments on one side or the other. And I think it just takes as like it's kind of echoing what you're saying as well, which is that it's got to be authentic and it's got to be natural and it's got to be in, because people are very attuned to a hard sell or a sales script or something, or greenwashing to that extent. And so it's a delicate balancing act, because there is a huge benefit to people choosing the right operators, but how you sell it has to be framed in terms of making a better experience, not from the virtue signaling or from that side of it.
Yeah, and it's possibly a little bit of a heavy conversation for a customer that's wanting to go on safari in Botswana, but the value chain of tourism, the indirect value chain of tourism, the fact that every bed that you sleep on has linen. Potentially they're outsourcing the washing of that linen to the community, etc. So your example is a beautiful example, but it's actually quite an easy or obvious example, because we see that a lot in tourism. But what we don't actually know and understand is that depth. The electric vehicles, someone manufactured those electric vehicles for your safari, and that is as a result of tourism. So just understanding the ripple effects and that deep and vast supply chain that feeds it. So we have a few questions that have come in, and if you do have a question, please feel free to add that to the Q&A folder at the bottom of your screen. So I'm going to throw some of those questions out. Don't worry, Kate, it'll be good. And I'll start with the first one, which is around the discussion about premium and new luxury being remote, less traveled destinations. Are you seeing that among your well-traveled clients, people who've already experienced traditional luxury and now they're wanting something a little bit more adventurous and less traveled? Justin, Kate, who wants to bear weight on this topic?
I'll go first.
Cool.
I'm sure Justin's got his opinions here too, but I'm definitely seeing that there are people who are coming to Africa for the third, fourth, fifth time. They've seen the big name faces. They've done the main activities. They've ticked off things like migration and village visits. And now they're going, what else? And they want to be pioneers and they want to be adventurers. And there are a couple of up and coming places that are exactly that. They're not advertising and they're definitely not pretending to be the most luxurious, most fancy places. But what they are offering you is something that a percentage of the world might ever experience. And that exclusivity is a premium, where you are, one of a handful of people coming into these places, getting to do and experience these activities. And it's not necessarily a big game destination. You're not necessarily going to be sitting there and seeing animals every single day, every 5 minutes of your game drive. It's all about the other little aspects and learning. And this is, again, where learning more about regenerative travel and positive impact. These people are coming back because they've experienced it. And for them, that's something that is now speaking to them. And Africa's obviously in their blood, and they're willing to pay more to, I want to say, have less, have less people, have less it's wildlife to a certain extent, but then to have more.
More quality.
More quality, more engaging with the researchers, meeting the communities and learning just exactly how far this magic chain goes of them staying at the lodge and where their dollars are actually landing up at the end of the day.
Justin?
Yeah, there's so much that kind of comes together in that question. So many different thoughts. So the one aspect to it touches on something we were talking about a little bit earlier, which is the sense of time, and that being sort of the new luxury, and how that actually goes hand in hand when you start looking at more hidden gem style destinations. Because the reality of going to a place that does not have 20 vehicles out on every game drive or more is that animals are not going to be habituated in the same way. So materially, if you go there for wildlife, you're going to have to understand it's not going to look the same way. But what it is going to have in abundance is the sense of discovery, adventure, which you're not going to get in the same way if you go on a tried and tested path. And in those sorts of areas, a lot of the time, I mean, if you're talking about really on the margins of commonly known, a lot of the time there's a lot of effort to get there. So it's not the kind of place that you're just going to plug into a 2 nights, 3 nights, 2 nights kind of situation. It's something that you're going to be spending the time at. And then that gets to that sense of what luxury actually is. It's getting to, you're going out, you're tracking for a full day to find a lion, as opposed to seeing 5 within 10 minutes of leaving the lodge. But there's a sense of achievement and accomplishment, and knowing as well that you are one of maybe a handful of people who've gotten to see that specific sighting. So yeah, I definitely think, and then obviously the market segment matters because the costs involved to getting to these places a lot of the time, just because the economies of scale matter. But if you start looking at the sort of more luxury clients, and I've got a few people who fit that category, where you can prime it for further trips. They've done 2 or 3 trips with you and start talking about, well, there's this really cool up and coming Cape. Recently was in Mozambique at Gorongosa. That's that kind of starting to get there as far as the infrastructure goes. But other areas like that, for clients of a certain bracket, you can go, maybe on the next trip, we can start looking at charters to get you to this area, a private charter potentially, or maybe you get a group of friends, or maybe it's to invest in getting there. And then it ties somebody to the journey in a way that's a lot more visceral than just, here's the package, off you go. So definitely, I mean, I think it's a cool space to play in, and it's not the one that you see every day, but when it's there, it's fun to get involved with those.
So talking about, you just mentioned Gorongosa. I was in Gorongosa in 2014. It was just coming out and being redeveloped. And Adrian, I'll come to you, because for me, it's a bit of a tricky balance, right? We want people to go to have the experience. We know that tourism funds conservation and communities, but at the same time, we know that it's got to be the right kind of tourism. So how do we, as a team, whether it's us here in the room, whether it's all of the people who are listening to us at the moment, how do we ensure or balance that opportunity with responsible development, so we're actually really having a positive impact and not telling ourselves a story that we're having a positive impact?
Yeah, I mean, it's complex, right? You alluded to it in the value chain, you alluded to it, and it's not a binary thing either. You don't have sustainable and unsustainable operators. I would say there's probably almost one other piece to it as well, which is that there's a whole bunch of places that need to be conserved that don't have marketable tourism products in them as well. And so, to touch on a question you asked earlier, which is how is Mawida Group a bit different about all of this as well? We do a lot of work in places where we will never have a tourism product because it's an important ecosystem. So we protect huge tracts of tsetse fly ridden miombo that have you're not going to see anything if you go there. You do there because it's massively important parts of the ecosystem. And so that's just that's sort of a bit of a detour. I mean, I think your question is, how do you make sure that tourism is a force for good when it is tourism? Yeah. So I'd say my first bit is we have to be pragmatic about the extent of what tourism can solve in conservation. Can play a huge role in some parts, but the sphere of places that need to be protected that don't have a marketable tourism product is much larger as well. And so your first question is, if you're evaluating people, is, do they have an opinion on stuff that's not going to make them money, right? And that's not to say it's bad to do tourism in places that make money. It's just that when you're spending your impact money, or where you're looking at which projects you back and partners and things, how much of it is from a genuine sort of this is good for the ecosystem, even if it's not good for us.
So yes to the tsetse fly.
Yeah, absolutely, exactly. Yeah, and yes to places that you'll never put a camp in, but still matter for catchment areas, for dispersal areas, for corridors, for all of them. Yeah.
Interesting. All right, so a couple more questions before we sign off for the afternoon/morning. There are a couple of questions around artificial intelligence, around human beings sort of being redundant. And we said it was the time of the travel expert a little bit earlier. So we'll just keep that as the lens through which we read these questions. The core source markets for high value tourism in South Africa, US, UK, and Germany are at the epicenter of a workforce transformation driven by AI. What, if any, mitigation would be advised? Does anybody have a viewpoint on that?
Yeah. Sorry, in what sense? The mitigation?
Any mitigation, I guess, of the impact of
travel consultants or for the
travel industry potentially. I would say they would, you know, there's good and bad. You have a workforce that perhaps would have more time if they're using generative AI in a good way. I would say that it would enhance you as the travel expert, certainly, and certainly not replace you. But do you, any of you
before you hear from the experts, all the people are actually impacted by this. No, I think the way I think about it is LLMs are great when what is an LLM? It's the average of the information available on the internet about a subject.
Yeah.
So if you have below average information about something, going to an LLM is going to get you up to speed very quickly. However, for lots of things that you want to do, like a safari, you need above average information to be able to get there. And so there's still a huge role. So where are LLMs going to be useful in our industry? I think one of the big ones is just standardizing unstructured information, right? You get queries that look like this. How do you make it simpler for people to process them, to get them into the right order so that you can figure out exactly what they want and package that faster and make something that is both better tailored, but also more responsive to people? There's a huge benefit for it. And I think the one thing for us I think the opportunity that it will create is to pick up on Justin's point about, this sort of over-indexing or algorithmic anchoring. I think that in a world where people might do perfunctory research and end up doing what an LLM tells them, which is the standard safari, there's going to be outsized benefit for people who can provide something that's not on that track. And I think there's going to be disproportionate gains to the quality of the experience that somebody who isn't relying on that same corpus of information can provide. And so I think that's another way of saying there is huge scope for the expertise of humans to augment that process.
Yeah, I mean, this obviously, I think everybody in every industry has given a lot of thought to, but as essentially like knowledge workers of a sort in this space, it's definitely something that you're alive to, and the you know which direction it's going to go. And the fact is nobody knows like right now what it's going to look like 2 years out or 3 years out. But I keep going back to this core idea, which is something that is more tangible maybe in certain areas. It's actually this lived example, or not lived by me, but an example that's played out in the world over recent years. Which is radiologists. So they've had access to LLMs for years. And, you know, at this stage, it could totally be outsourced. But at the same time, and I'm not trying to compare us to health providers, but, you know, do you want to be told essentially by a robot some news that you really don't want to hear? And I think in a similar way, and again, not comparing, but I think that human thread is something that is very much alive in this space. It's something that when somebody, I mean, we've just spent, you know, an hour plus detailing time as a luxury and how much people invest in this and how much thought they're giving to it and all of that. And I think at the end of the day, people still want to know that there's a human touch involved in something that's so close to their hearts and to their families when they're bringing in these multi-generational sort of family trips. And so I think it's obviously got to be a more nuanced answer as to which part of it, when you're talking about the industry as a whole, there are going to be areas that are affected, but we're talking about what we do on a daily basis. Certainly think your kind of meat and potato sausage factory style trips, that's probably going to be a little bit tricky. You know, if it's the rinse and repeat, that's going to be the first sort of thing to get hurt. But yeah, I think Adrian made a perfect point there around it. It's just, you know, it feels like there will always be space for people operating or willing to think outside and move to the margins of a space. And unfortunately in Africa travel, and hopefully for generations to come, there will continue to be those spaces. So
that I think also what the one question we have around here is your customers and workforce is shrinking. So their ability to travel because of the impact of generative AI, and like your roles have changed. You know, you're now more curating, editing, kind of going beyond the discovery phase. That too is true for many roles that exist in the world. And so yes, there's certainly going to be an impact from an economic perspective. New jobs will be created, existing jobs will change. And your role is changing. You are obviously adapting and making sure that you are leveraging that to the best of your ability. And your customer profile might change. You might have fewer customers, but they might spend more. And so really to predict what that looks like is going to be interesting for next year's State of Safari.
Meet you back here in a year.
I mean, the one thing that just keeps bouncing around in my mind is that when you phone a call center, it's your insurance, it's whatever you need, and you've got questions, and you just want me to answer those questions.
I don't want to talk to chatbot.
I don't want to talk to a chatbot. I don't want to talk to an AI voice, however nice they are. I want somebody who's going to answer my question. And I think that is where we still are the experts. And you know, as you said, meat and potato sausage factory, if that's just you just want a trip, boom, plug it into AI and off you go. But if you really have questions and you want to, you're spending a lot of money on an African safari and you have proper questions, I think you want a real person to speak to. Because I know I do. I've decided for a trip to Europe, I'm going to plug it all into AI and see what it comes up with. And I've kind of gone, oh, well, I'm not really impressed with the results. I would still love to find somebody who does African safaris, but in that country. That's not Africa. It's in Europe, but somebody who does what we do there.
So as the experts, the final question to either of you, Justin or Kate, is a question from Amanda where she has asked, she's working on a story about safaris for physically impaired travelers. So this is a market segment, visually impaired, whatever the impairment is. I did a webinar last year on neurodiverse travelers and how they navigate the safari experience, which was absolutely fascinating. Is there a specific property or destination off the top of your head that you would say is ideal for travelers who are physically impaired?
Gosh.
I mean, well, I've got a few that I'm thinking of. I'm thinking, well, I'll start big and I'll go with airlines like Emirates and British Airways. Emirates has launched a program. My stepson is autistic and we needed to fly him overseas on his own. It was a huge, big deal. And we were investigating airlines. Emirates was one of them, but we opted for BA in the end just because he was going direct to London. And they offered wheelchair assistance to him. He has cerebral palsy as well. They would have a representative with him at all times, right up until he gets on the plane. And then that person would hand him over to the air hostess or stewardess on the flight so that he had a point of reference. If he was feeling overwhelmed, he was too hot, he was too cold. If somebody asked him a question, because he generally tends to shut down. So yeah, Emirates and BA are leading the charge. Then a large Sabi Lodge comes up. They've got a proper chalet that is 100% kitted out for somebody who is in a wheelchair, and it's not a bumpy path; it's a path. And the lodge is set up so that that person can get around independently. The bathroom is properly Bush Lodge. Properly attired. I also investigated it for previous travelers of mine, in that often what happens with flights in Africa is, if you're in Botswana or Kenya, Tanzania, you've got to climb out of these little planes. So South Africa suddenly becomes very accessible because you are able to get out of a normal commercial plane where you've got a wheelchair lift into the plane. And then I did check that when you land at Kruger Airport or Hoedspruit, there is again, they still call it stairs, but it's you roll out and then they just drop you manually to the ground, and then you are able to wheelchair in. We can organize a vehicle where you can get in and out, and then there are vehicles that are also then, when you're on the game drives, they are equipped for a disabled passenger.
Justin?
Yeah, I think it's difficult because there's no catch-all response to that. It really, you have to dial into what the specific needs are. I had a honeymoon couple who were both in wheelchairs a few years ago, and so I did a deep dive on all of this as far as accessibility goes, and then subsequently I've obviously had various inquiries and conversations with industry colleagues. And it really does come down to the individual. There are some that are better, and I would say probably broadly speaking, you're going to have a wider range of options if you're going to those tried and tested areas, just because there's more inventory. South Africa is good in the sense that they've pushed they put that front of mind for a lot of the properties and safari areas. But it really does come down to, sorry, what had she said? There was a specific, was it
physically impaired? So
physically impaired. Okay, yeah. So it does become a little tricky because little things that I never would have thought of before, like a gap between the ramp. And so some places say, we're accessible, but then you look at the actual logistics of moving, and it's suddenly something that seems small when you're not thinking about it is massive. So it does, those kinds of consults do require a lot of work to really get down to, what are the specific needs? Are they comfortable? Can they move themselves in and out of a vehicle, for instance?
So ChatGPT is going to be
definitely not. No, that's not one that's exactly.
And as I'm sure you probably know, it's the broader spectrum. It could be tactile, it can be noise, it can be crowds, it can be open spaces, it can be so many different things. Are they verbal, non-verbal? Are they physically impaired? Along with the neurodiversity, I mean, the scale is
massive.
So I always try and say to the people, look, in order to help you the best, I need to know absolutely everything. Because if you don't tell me one thing and then you land up there and you go, but I can't do that, and we didn't know, it's just it's impossible for us.
Just sorry, the final point on that is that is absolutely the most important thing, is being willing to get candid in an honest, open way early on, and to be able to have a fluid conversation with somebody, because a lot of time people are reluctant to, they're scared to, but the reality is the client is wanting to engage on these matters and is oftentimes waiting for you to broach the topic. So don't be afraid of that. Obviously do it in a sensitive manner, but at the same time ask the questions that you need asking, because it gets harder as well the deeper that you go into a consult. So just try to think about it on the front end.
And by extension, and I'm sure camps and lodges, the more they know, the more they can prepare. So you do yourself a disservice and you do the lodge a disservice if you don't fully divulge what your limitations, your restrictions, your impairments are, your challenges. The more the lodges they know and they can prepare for you, the more they will do that. They just need the time to order in the supplies, to figure it out. And like I said, if you're neurodiverse and it's a tactile thing and you only eat 3 things, that's fine. As long as we know what those 3 things are, we'll get them for you. We'll make a plan. I think as Justin says, the more candid, the more honest you can be, it's actually about helping yourself at the end of the day.
Well, there you have it, folks. Information is power, and I know that we've imparted a lot of information and insights this afternoon. Thank you, Justin, Kate, and Adrian, each of you, for your time, and for you that have joined us today for a very extensive discussion. I do hope that the insights were useful to you, and we're looking forward to seeing you on our sunny side of the world shortly. Thank you very much for joining us, and goodbye.